Welcome to the newly named Home for Humanity podcast. Today I'm interviewing Kyle Koch, and we met at Return to the Source last summer, but I knew of you through Rafe's videos and hearing you on his podcast talk about Wilderness Awareness School, which piqued my interest to the degree that I visited and attended. And now we kind of have a lot in common. And I have a ton of questions about it because I've never really sat down and asked you about it. So how are you? Thank you.
I'm doing well. It's so good to see your face and hear your voice. I'm super happy and excited to connect and keep reweaving the intersection of our stories. Yeah, it's really fun to be a part of other people's journeys, a journey that I myself went through. In the opposite order, I went to Wilderness Awareness School and then through Evolve Move Plays work. So it's really exciting to chat and be in dialogue.
Yeah, thank you for being willing and diving in. So in the name of diving in, let's start there. Wilderness Awareness School, we both went through the 9-month Anake, now called the Immersion program. What year did you complete that, actually, is my first question.
Yeah, I went to the program 2011 to 2012.
Okay. You were the 2012 class. I'm the 22 class. Oh, 10 years. We graduated.
I didn't even realize. That's perfect.
Wow. I was the class of 22 of 22. We finished with 22 people in the year 22. So I just have a ton of questions. I'll just keep going. Why do you think most people don't include the human animal as a part of ecology? Because that's what that program did for me, was synthesize in a lot of people that we are nature. But why do most people not see the human as part of nature?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I spend a lot of time talking about why we are part of nature and why we are one of the other animals on this planet. But I have not thought a lot about why people don't include what is it about the human mind that has created such a separateness from nature? And the first thought that comes to my mind is safety. And I was actually listening to, there's this thing on Netflix called Myths and Monsters. And something that really stood out to me is in a lot of these Greek myths, they talk about wilderness as a place that you don't really go. And it's a place of mystery and monsters and like a place of the gods. And, if you go there, you might not ever come back. And so it's interesting to see that separateness in these older myths. And I was curious about, I wonder what indigenous stories related to wilderness or life outside of the village. And I'm interested to see where they meet and where that divergence is that had led us to such a separateness. But ultimately, I think it's about safety. As we cultivate resources and through conservation of energy, which is the default mode of basically all of nature, right? All of nature is how are we the most efficient with our energy? Right? Birds are a great example of this. A lot of animals posture, they don't actually fight, right? And they're very oriented on how are they going to get their next meal. A coyote doesn't waste a lot of energy like a domestic dog does. They're psh. And I think as we started to become less nomadic and we started to have these technologies and these reliable sources of food and water, that's one of the hypotheses of why agriculture started. it's more work and it's less nutrients, but ultimately it's more reliable. You're going to more reliably have an abundance of food source when you put so much directed energy into cultivating it. And then as you build a home, you don't have to build a home again. And as you gather firewood, you don't have to gather firewood. And as you store food, you don't have to get food. So yeah, my wondering is it from a deep place of like safety and knowing, and then you see in these myths that wilderness becomes such a place of the unknown.
Cool. I like that show, the Myths and Monsters. It's pretty cool. Another thing that had a big impact on me was learning about tracking. And my question is, how has tracking changed the way you see the world? But like everything you're just describing to me has that thread of being able to track stories and history and people and the human needs. How has tracking played a part in what you just described?
Yeah, I'm currently inspired and curious and rekindling my tracking journey through a mentor of mine. And tracking is, he asked me the question like, what is tracking? And or what is a track? And I'm like, a track is a representation of an event. And it can be on the meta or kind of like micro model, right? If we look at a hill or a mountain, like that is a track of a geological event, maybe a flood, maybe a volcano, maybe an earthquake, right? I have a friend who's a geologist, and when you go on a road trip with him, he is like a tracking of landscape and telling you these deep stories of like why and how this rock was laid and where it came from. And a stain on your shirt is an event. You were eating, something happened, it fell on your shirt, there's an event that happened there. And as we learn to track and pay attention, we find causal and connectedness in the greater scheme of life and the arc of the day, and ultimately in all of the stories that we tell ourselves. We think a lot of things are happenstance. Oh, this just happened to me is completely random, or we get in like a negative feedback loop around our perception of events. And tracking is a more objectional way to start to look at these remnants of an event. And I think when we, the tracking the wildlife is really the origin of a lot of our language and putting together story as we track animals who are our food source or leading us to other resources such as water and plants. We find ourselves like paying closer attention to what that disturbance, what that track actually means. And like Katie Bowman talks about, like our bones are the stories that we leave behind. When an archaeologist someday far from now finds your bones in the earth, it will tell a story. The scars, the broken, the thickness, the density, the shapedness of your bones is ultimately a track, and it's part of the story that you leave behind. So just to recap, what is a track? What is tracking? What does it do? A track is a representation of any event. And when we apply tracking to our lives, we see the greater story or the connectedness, and ultimately the impact that we are having is left as tracks.
I like how you said the way we track wildlife has shaped our language. And I think so much of being able to track the movement in nature has shaped, like I'm working on a nutrition class right now, and I talk about nausea and how digestion has a direction, and like we throw up and like things settle, we oh, what's the other one? I like goes down. Like when we're choking, it's going down the wrong pipe because we assume food goes down in the wrong way. Goes, and like the directionality of our functionality is, that's what, yeah, the lens of tracking. That's so cool. Thanks for that.
Yeah, and those are like tracking our body, our emotions, our events, right? They're causal.
Yeah.
And there's actually, like Andrew Huberman was talking about this, like the disgust mechanism. If you like drink something, even if it's flavorless or whatever, but it has some kind of like poison in it and it like makes you upset, you will like retroactively like remember that. And then even if you have no idea what the causal event is, when you go and reach for that glass of water the next day, there is like a disgust mechanism. That again, these are events. Events can be paid attention to and put into pattern, and those patterns can create causal relationships. Like this thing did this thing, I'm going, and then once you recognize the pattern, there's an opportunity to change the pattern.
Yeah. It's like there is no such thing as leave no trace. Everything traces.
Exactly. Leave no trace is stupid.
Another thing that Wilderness Awareness School is founded on, that now that I'm in the youth apprenticeship and I'm working with kids outside of a classroom and working with mentoring kids, I'm obsessed, and I was before, and that's one of the things that led me to come to this school, is how do people learn without public education? How do we learn without school? How do we learn without, what everything, like I loved school. I wanted homework. I loved teachers. I loved the class. I loved getting a new schedule every semester. And I love learning. And now I'm obsessed with how to learn without all that. Do you have anything to say about how do we learn without school?
Yeah, I'm aware that this was kind of the big question that led John Young to create Wilderness Awareness School. He was like, how do people learn without school? And he went around and looked at a lot of place-based cultures who don't have quote unquote school. But I think learning is a natural proclivity to humans. You're never not learning, right? You're always adapting. You're paying attention to your salience landscape, and you're always finding more efficient ways to move towards whatever it is that you want. And I think ultimately that process has led to a very narrowing of what some people in power at some point found a very efficient way to convey a lot of information in a way that worked for some people, right? But as we all know, there are many ways of learning, and I think so much of our learning is happening implicitly, right? Like children are paying attention to their parents, and they're noticing ways of being and actions and consequences and results and all of these things. So I think ultimately, how do you learn? I think you're always learning, at least to some level. But I think when we can make the unconscious conscious, or some of the implicit things more explicit, or we can retroactively remind ourselves of how we arrived. So that's one of the things that I've been chewing on for the last 10 years since leaving Wilderness Awareness School, was like, what the hell happened to me? Like, I used to like party and drink and live in the city and do software. And I went through this experience, and now I'm like struggle to be inside for more than a few hours a day, and yeah, have a bit more of a radical lifestyle. And so all of these things implicitly happened to me. I changed and I shifted and I molded because of different salient landscapes that I was moving through. And now I'm like, okay, can I reliably and radically and consistent, or how can I reliably and systematically change people's belief systems, right? And change my own belief systems. Things I know to be true, I don't necessarily believe because I can't do it. And so that's where I'm trying to find that through line of all the implicit things that are happening, and trying to like highlight principles or yeah, just bigger themes and bring them to the fore so that we can like learn them a little bit more explicitly.
That ties in beautifully to the thing I want to talk about next, because saying I love school, part of my reality crashing down on me is it didn't matter how much I learned in a formal education. What I believed about myself was actually like what the unspoken things that I learned about reality were actually guiding my life far more than like microbiology class, like, and my major and all of the things that I was taught in formal education. So I want to talk next about return to the source. Not last year, the year before, 2021, which is when I had this, I didn't, your facilitation, it was also a thing that I'm like, what is going on? Like, why are these things like, well, you took us to a sit spot, and I had this like grand revelation at a sit spot, but I was also the context leading up to that was singing. For me, it was singing with men, because since a little bit of context before that, context for the context. I grew up in a religious setting where women weren't allowed to have leadership. And after I left, I went into a lot of women's groups and got in touch with my voice with singing with only women. And I didn't realize that was the only singing circles I was involved in until I came to return to the source and was singing with these powerful men. And I had this like aha moment of like, wait, I love men, and saying it out loud in a group of people. I was so confused why I was saying that. And a year and a half later, I've like really chewed on that and took that into the immersion with me. And now that I work with children, like I had just last week, a boy was like, well, we're just boys just don't cry, we're just told to bottle it up. And I'm like, how are we still, like, despite it being a thing that we all know that we want to work with, it's still like culturally explicit, that thing. So what's my question? My question is, the masculine and feminine. Well, why did return to the source make certain things explicit to the degree that that's what helped me realize a realization like that? And what's the masculine feminine balance that you see in that? Did you grab a question in there at all? Like, do you have anything that's coming to mind?
Yeah, a couple things. I mean, I deeply resonate with that young boy's sentiment. I mean, I grew up with three brothers and in the Midwest, kind of very conservative. And, like my dad and my grandpa did not explicitly express love for me. And crying and expression of emotion was generally not welcomed and kind of like avoided. A lot of things were trying to spun onto the positive. And yeah, it wasn't until years later that many years later that I discovered love languages. And I'm like, oh, my dad does love me because he does lots of acts of service for me. But I'm also now living still in the aftermath of it. It takes a lot for me to cry. It's almost like a meditation. Like I have to be alone with no distractions, and I have to like hold the sadness for a long time. And like my brain wants to like pull me in other directions. I'm like, no, like we are here in order for me to experience the sadness. And yeah, and so throughout my process and connecting with nature and being witnessed and seen in groups and feeling safe and being able to express my vulnerability has led me to want to do that with others. And it's like the idea of more things are possible and creating a safe container to do that. And yeah, so a couple things at Return to the Source. Connected to Wilderness Awareness School. So WAS runs a program called The Art of Mentoring. And it's where all of these facilitators, teachers, educators of all different kinds come, and they come to learn the 8 Shields cultural mentoring model. And while they do learn a lot, it's very experiential based. And these people end up playing and having an insane amount of fun. And typically after the Southeast Day, which is like the child's passions day of just like timelessness and play and adventure, over and over again, the next day, people were reliably experiencing grief to the point that they called it the wall of grief. And it was happening again, reliably year after year. Finally, some of the facilitators are like, hey, like we have to do something about this. Like we are, and it was not the intention of the teachers to like bring up this grief, but it was happening, right? And you just have to acknowledge that it's happening and then find a healthy, safe outlet for that. Well, this too was happening at Evolve Move Play at the Return to the Source retreat, even before I was a part of it. Actually, I was a part of it for a student for a few years and a volunteer, and then I took a couple years off. And in the time that I took off, there was actually a huge rupture around grief and sadness and expression between the masculine and the feminine, actually, because Rafe is like a hyper masculine dude. And he told the story of Beauty and the Beast, which he thought was like a feminine hero's journey, kind of like archetypal story. And the women were like, not. They were like, no, like that is not how we as women feel about this story. And there's a strong rupture in that moment. And then also grief would come up, and it's typically like day 4 on these experiences. It's like people are having such powerful transformative experiences. The dominant orientation in that container is fun and growth mindset and adventure. And so there tends to be an upwelling of grief for not having those experiences and not having people in your life that you get to have those experiences with. And it becomes like very palpable in that container. Like, wow, like all these people are seeing me. All these people are supporting me. I'm having so much fun. Like, oh, why don't I have that in my life? Like, why don't I have these people? And so I was aware of these things, and I'm aware of the type of person that Rafe is. And it's funny, like I am a very masculine person, but I've softened that, and I've tried to be more of a representation of the safe, solid masculine in touch with the emotions and ability to hold space. Kind of like the feminine essence of the masculine is something that it's been reflected that I represent. And so bringing these into the mix, and a lot of my teachers have been women. Some of my most like influential teachers are women, and the way that they like create space and invitations is something that really attracted me, that I really wanted to explicitly fold into the mix, where I feel like the masculine is like, this is what we're doing, this is what you're learning, this is what the takeaway is, like this is the step by step what you should be experiencing. And so yeah, to answer your question, like I wouldn't say that I was explicitly highlighting those things, but I was trying to embody the invitation and the giving of space to the students. Like, here is a loose framing. Here are some invitations that might be salient to you. And now here is a dedicated container of spaciousness for whatever is present for you to emerge within that. And I think, and you can tell me better, like, I think that is more of a feminine type of approach.
Definitely. I mean, the container was there, and later you said the words like, thank you for showing up. And I was like, what does that mean? What does showing up mean? And I think what because I've gotten that before. People are like, yeah, you show up, you're really here. And I think part of that is because I like I resonate with like being able to lean into the environment. Part of why I love home and humanity as concepts is because I want to feel a sense of belonging, maybe. And when I get to a place where I can feel that, I really lean into it. And what I was realizing then was that I was safe enough to with men and women. And what I remember what I said was, yeah, because growing up with masculine leadership, I always idealizing it. Always, a lot of my teachers have been men, and wanting to, yeah, either like become it or shun away from it. For me, and then with singing too, someone was there who knew some of my old church songs, and so being able to sing that in a new body, in a new place, in a new context was so healing. And I would not have used that word like even a year ago, but now I'm like, oh, okay, it's really important to do this work. And I understand now why, because I feel, I mean, like, part of why I'm here doing this right now was because I no longer feel like my voice isn't important. I know inherently now that it is. And like, that to me is a lot of that masculine feminine work and bringing that balance. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm just, again, like, I don't think of myself as like a teacher or an educator. I really resonate with the idea of that. Like, I'm a facilitator. My job is to create context and a container for teaching and education to happen. And I'm not the one doing it. It's the trees and the plants and the people and the connections. It's the multiplicity of things that, when set into motion, could do a better job than I could ever like try to convey through my words. So yeah.
Yeah, because it wasn't your words. It was, in that moment for me, it was the water. It was the way the water was hitting the pools, and the way, like, I want to get into like relevance realization, but and what the hell that is. But like it was seeing something that had no words that brought, it was relevant in a way that some kind of alchemy happened, that when words came out, it was, I was shocked. And I'm surprised I'm even talking about this, because it was such an odd thing, because I used to not cry. I used to not be able to cry. And I was suddenly crying in front of a bunch of people, as what I was so nervous about, just being like a hysterical woman in front of all these, athletic men. And it just clashed all that, I had men afterward, like, really support me and really like tell me that they admired that. And that was just as medicinal as the saying it and being witnessed and being supported. And so it's, and fear, I brought up like fear. What is the role of fear in an event like Return to the Source?
Fear. I feel like fear has so many connotations and interpretations of what is it, what does it do, what is its biological purpose. And ultimately, like, I don't think I like this idea of it's like we can't conquer our fears, but we can learn to manage them at really high levels. Fear it's not necessarily telling you not to do something, it's telling you to proceed with caution, to consider the ramifications of your actions, and to also create clarity in your intentionality or your willingness to engage with something. Fear is also an opportunity to rewrite stories. A lot of fears are very illogical, right? They don't make logical sense. They are emergent feelings in response to some type of stimulus. And I think the analogy that works best in relation to our events is the analogy of breaking the jump. And Breaking the Jump is a really great book by a woman named Julie Angel. I actually just had a really great interview with her, and she used parkour as the kind of bedrock for her PhD work. And this idea of breaking the jump, in a sense, is facing the fear. Is like you feel a call to jump, you feel this call to adventure, but it's outside of the scope of reality that you've experienced. You're like, I've never done a jump this big. I've never jumped over a creek this raging, and but yet it calls to you in a way that you want to experience, but the fear is almost talking you out of it. And we as mentors and facilitators, we can create a very safe container for you to start to lean into those fears, because I'm the medical guy on staff. So if you get hurt, I'm here to support you with all the things that you need. I will take you to the hospital. I can also encourage you that you are capable of this challenge. And so breaking the jump, you feel this call to the jump, and you start to assess the jump and the potential consequences of making it and not making it. And you go through this like, okay, well, if I don't make the jump, these are the potential falls. Do I feel confident that I can mitigate the fall? Do I feel okay with accepting the potential injury that fall may induce? And if you're okay with all of those things, then you like have to relax into the jump. And I like Rafe really talks about this is a good difference between the masculine and feminine type of energies. Is like the masculine is like, I'm gonna do the jump, and the feminine is like relax, like accept the jump and move into it in that way. And there's a time and place for each of those things. But once you do the jump and you're successful, you have now opened up an entire world of jumps, right? And you could equate this to asking somebody out on a date, like, oh, you're very fearful, and then they say yes, and you're like, wow, like I have the ability to like, or like ask your boss for a raise, or to start a business. You're like, wow, I started a business, it was successful, I'm gonna start 5 more businesses, right? So there's this fear is like it's like an illuminating of a self-limiting belief that now is to the fore, and you have the opportunity to move through that fear and or accept the consequences of at least trying. So that's how we like somebody was really impressed. They're like, wow, like you guys really let your students take a lot of risks, like and we're like, yeah, because that's the power, that's where transformation is possible. That's where like you get to experience that heroic version of yourself. And the final thought I'll say on that is there's a difference between risk and danger. Danger is the severity of whatever might happen, and risk is the probability of that thing happening, right? So if danger is high, right, we want risk to be very low, right? It's like a 5-foot jump between 2 buildings, very dangerous. If you miss, you're gonna die. Most people that are coming to our events jumping a 5-foot gap, very easy, very low probability of messing up. And if the risk is very high, we would like the danger to be very low, right? And so we help our students modulate and identify those 2 things so that they become in right relationship with each other.
Cool.
Right? It's like people are like, don't invest in Bitcoin if you don't have money to lose. Right?
I'm beginning to, it was really Return the Source that showed me how much I love my fear, because that it was the jump, you know, in Closing Circle, what is it you're taking away? I said the jump, because I had never felt so afraid of bodily harm than when I jumped off of a cliff into a pool of water where there were trunks of trees, and like that I can't undo that courage, you know, because I felt it in my body. It was there. How do I know I did it? Because I did it. And that desire for risk, I think, is so inherent in us as humans, because like I worked parkour summer camps with a bunch of kids, and all these parents were like, you know, I would let them climb trees all the way up, and the parents were like, good, they really want to. And that to mitigate that danger for them, yeah, I think if given the opportunity, the kind of learning and growth that can happen there is remarkable. Cool.
Well said.
Let's see, there's also in the jump too, like I like how you said there's different ways of going about the jump, but something I remember Rafe saying, I think it was from the talk, he did something about the shadow of the feminine, and it was like even the 2 different ways of doing it, and even the moment of the jump, there can be the running to do it, and then that moment of trust, that moment where you're like, I believe, I mean, I've already left the ground, so you know, I am going to trust that I will land, and you know, yeah. So I guess within the moment, there's both too.
Yeah, trusting in yourself. I think that's maybe the deepest part of it, is like there's a moment where the logical mind has gone away and the deep trust has emerged, and that's your moment to capture it. It is fleeting. And when you engage with that moment, I think you can like strengthen that over time to recognize like this is the moment. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
That was, I mean, oh, I could talk about my relationship with that, with Return to the Source, but I kind of, I think, yeah, I'll just say with my relationship with men and that experience, it was, I wanted to break the chain that I was believing about that masculine feminine dichotomy. Because I left the church and that idea of feminine leadership at 20, but it was the next 8-9 years of my life that solidified that there was nowhere that I was still living in that. And it wasn't until Return to the Source that I was like, I am so sick of believing this. I still hold these beliefs about men and women, even though I've been like an angry feminist for the past decade. Like I still hold these limiting beliefs. And and then taking that awareness and then taking that into the immersion. I mean, I literally jumped off a cliff at Return to the Source. A week later, visited the land at Wilderness Awareness School, was like, you know what? I think I need to do this. Jumped anyway, came back to Missouri, left my whole life, broke a lot of hearts, including my own, and just moved and did it. And was like, I'll be fine. I'll figure it out. And I did. And it just rocks. And I think there was a point to what I was saying. And now I'm thinking about, I will be a Return to the Source again this year, next summer. And hopefully get to talk with more people about the work of John Dervanke, which is what I want to talk to you about next. Because I love your interview with him. I saw that after watching a lot of his Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. A lot of what I just mentioned about my personal life was like searching for meaning instead of old belief systems that I just, finding meaning in what I actually believed in, instead of someone else's belief system that they gave to me and just calling it truth. And so where do I want to start? Well, first of all, what did you think of interviewing John and getting to know John? The one thing that stuck out when just off the top of my head that he said was like, and Kyle was a hawk, and how you were able to bring this cool nature connection to his life and then his work, what's been your impact from his work and vice versa?
Yeah, John's podcast, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, gave me, it's kind of like the Rosetta Stone of my experience. It was like, oh, these are like both historical, cultural, and scientific translations of that question that I was asking, like, what happened to me in this experience? Is like, wow, I was feeling deep belonging. I was having all of these flow state experiences. I was in right relationship. I had tightly coupled feedback between me and my environment. I had so much of this participatory perspectival knowledge and experience and also the ecology of practices that are the core routines of nature connection are kind of the original wisdom cultivation practices in my current belief system. So as I've been going back through the work of Tom Brown and Grandfather, like one of Grandfather's missions, and again, whether or not he's a real character, I think he's also a modern day archetypal myth that we can point to and we can derive meaning from. And I think John is basically on the same quest that Grandfather was, is he's looking at all of these different modalities that have existed throughout time and trying to test them and to parse them apart and actually pull out the deeper gold and the shared principles between all of them. And there's this idea from grandfather that when we take these things to wilderness, that's where we find the deepest truth. When we take it to wilderness, the dogmas are unable to apply themselves in that environment. And so, yeah, John's work gave me just a huge depth of language to be aware of my own experience, and then also gave me the words to translate like what I'm doing. Like, what am I doing with this whole nature thing? Like, why am I so adamant about connecting people to nature? Is because I believe it puts you into the story. And if you're in a story and you're aware of the story that you're in and that's being told, inherently a story has meaning. And so you can derive meaning from the participation of your character in that story, and you can cultivate the character. Like, things don't just happen to you. Things aren't just always happening to you. We as humans have this amazing ability of choice, and what we choose to pay attention to in any moment is what we ultimately bring into the world. We give life to the things we pay attention to. They become relevant, they become salient, they become important, and they become part of the story. And ultimately that gives us meaning. Somebody was telling me the other day, they're like, the really beautiful thing about the world is like nothing inherently, like the world is meaningless. Like nothing has meaning, but meaning is emergent in our experience, or it's imbued from us into our experience, right? Like, you were having this experience with the water, and meaning like emerged from it, and you put language to it, right? If anybody else saw that, it might have no relevance to them. Like, maybe like the birds were like, yeah, we don't get what you're interpreting there. So yeah, that's the profound. John's work has had a profound impact in both realizing what happened to me, how I can be more effective in the world, and ultimately, yeah, just giving language and validity to things I like felt and known to be true, but couldn't bring into like my speech.
Yeah, because when it was a certain game that really I loved, that like my brain felt funny after the first time I played Nest Robbers, and like to hear you talk about the way John would break down that game was super cool, because his to say that because there's no language in that game. So what was that like for you to have, like, to have someone give you that validity and language to something that you knew you had this felt sense of, because I could only feel it before giving language to it. I mean, maybe that's the way it works. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good story. Because yeah, like Rafe talks about, like when I presented this idea, I didn't really tell him what I was going to do. He's like, Kyle, I want you to bring bird language. I'm like, cool, I got it. Don't worry about it. And then I was like, cool, we're going to go play this game. And Rafe's like, oh, I'm going to go like sit out. And we played this game, and people had a really revelatory experiences, both like during, but more so afterwards. They were able to see more perspectively in the world of a bird. And that process actually happened for a few years. Like I would go to present the game and Rafe would leave. And students would have this really amazing time. And then as I think Rafe first, like it became an insight for Rafe in his conversation, one of his earlier conversations with John Vervaeke, in that like, oh, like this is a participatory perspectival experience of what someone might normally convey as propositional information. And yeah, maybe for the listener, you don't know what any of that means. So I can very briefly, like, a proposition is a statement. It's like, yeah, like cats have claws. You know, cats have four toes, fifth toe up top, and they have I don't like the word retractable. They're like more like protractable claws, and they have fur, and they're mammals. Like these are all things you could know about a cat, but you don't ever have to see it or interact with it. These are all just statements I can make about something. You know, if you've ever Googled anything, you're Googling propositions. Procedural knowledge is how to do something. It is the step by step sequence of events or actions that lead you to be able to do something. Like, how do I build a table? Well, first you get wood and you get a screwdriver and you get these are all the steps in how to build a table. Again, you could know how to build a table, but you still might never have built a table, right? These are people who tell you about all these things that are wonderful that they've never done, right? They're like, oh yeah, you should definitely, this is how you heal all your, you should, oh, you want to heal your knee? This is how you should heal your knee. Like, have you ever had a knee injury? Like, no. Have you ever gone through this process? No. So it's just procedural information. But then you have participatory information. It's like, what is it like to participate in an experience? Like, what is it like to build a table? What is it like to actually go through those procedures? What are your learnings? What is your experience? The other good one is like, the only way to know what it's like to be in a relationship with somebody is to be in a relationship with somebody, right? You can't really tell somebody how to be in a relationship. Like, oh, this is how you should be in a relationship. Well, it's a dynamical process of like you and me and meeting and moving back and forth that we both participate in. And through participation, we then know what it's like to be in that. And then the perspectival is to know by being. Like, right, this is like the kind of embodied reality of an experience. Like, you know, if you share with me your perspective, I can know better what it's like for you to go through an experience. I can start to take on your perspective. By becoming a bird, I can take on the perspective of what it might be like to see through the eyes of a bird. And through that participatory and perspectival knowing, and all of these different ways of knowing have different areas of memory that are associated with it. So they're actually really profound ways of getting to know anything. And ultimately the bird language game was allowing people to be a bird and to live through the perspective of a bird while participating in the reality and in the relationships of other birds, other creatures, and like what it's like to like feel that viscerally, so that when you go into the world, you're like, oh, like I see this robin, like, ooh, I kind of know what it's like to be that robin. I have a little bit more of an understanding of what that robin's experience is like, and so I can glean more information from that experience. so yeah, so to be like validated by John, who's the professor of cognitive science at the University of Toronto, to be like, this is not a trivial game. You're like, guys, this is like the greatest game. We should be playing this game like once a month.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
we should have communities of people playing this game. Like it is not a small thing. And the other big revelation from having John being a participant at one of our experiences is like we would do something and we would like offer our reflections of it, and then John would sit down and do like a 1 hour talk of like, guys, like roughhousing, like this is what it's doing for like your brain and your body and your nervous system on a level, and your ability to cultivate wisdom. So for me, as somebody who has diverted from the mainstream and I live what some would consider like a radical lifestyle, and to be seen as like there's this saying, like a lot of people are like, oh, I was like doing this, and this, and then I eventually had to get a real job. And like, oh, I was doing this and then I had to get a real job. And having John at that experience, and he did a pilot study, and we are in the process for hopefully getting $1 million grant for the next Return to the Source, to come and it be studied, was like, I have a fucking real job. My job is so real and so important that anything else to me is like trivial. Like I cannot waste my time with not offering these experiences to people because of the power and transformation and connecting to nature. I was listening, and when we connect people with nature, like what I'm doing is like hopefully saving humanity and saving the world. And like I don't say that from a place of like ego or like this is me doing it. It's like this is just the realization of the work and the gifts that I have to offer through my own struggles. Like I am just hopefully offering all the things that I did not have, all the experience that I wished I had growing up. I like feel privileged to be in a position to offer those things to other people, so that ultimately through participating in as a human animal in the ecology of the world, we can realize that we are not separate and that our impacts are vitally important, and that we need to become aware of how we are impacting the world with every footstep, breath, action that we take. And once we become aware of our role in this story and our patterns, only then can we start the slow shifting towards what is hopefully a more regenerative existence.
Oh, yeah, well said. 100%. You do have a real job. I was teaching, I do a handful of monthly programs as an instructor with Wilderness Awareness School right now. And one morning I was sharing a success in the real estate world for me. And someone was like, another instructor was like, oh, that's such an adult job. And I was like, we also have an adult job too. And it was kind of a joke and it was cute, but I'm like, I treat both like real jobs, because what we're doing here, I mean, like I moved across the country to do this, like to get the opportunity to learn how to do this work, because what this is for children, yeah, it's not something I had access to growing up. And it's something that I do think raising humans in a connected to their environment and the world, you know, that awareness of, I don't know, that their nature, I think will have those, there's more benevolence in actions when you see that we are connected. So yeah,
And that's the formative time of our lives, that so many kids don't know, like they think milk comes from a carton, and there's all of these separateness is of the world that are just leading to the cycle, right? The perpetual cycle that we're in. And that if we don't have those experiences and we're unaware, I mean, we can get a little bit into like relevance realization, but it's basically like, if you don't even know that something is happening, then if you don't know, it doesn't matter. If it doesn't matter, you don't care about it. If you don't care about it, you don't save it or protect it. And then you don't even know when it is destroyed. You're like, somebody might be like, hey, like this species just went extinct. And you're like, cool, I didn't even know. It must not have impacted my life because it doesn't impact my life. And then that process happens, until eventually we're in a very vacant world.
I mean, this goes back to attention. I want to talk about attention, but first let's geek out on bird language, because when I first saw bird skits, well, like had bird language explained to me through theater, I suppose was the beginning. And because that's that nonverbal, like I tell people my favorite language is the nonverbal kind. I grew up with my only sibling is a deaf sister. She can't hear. She couldn't hear her whole life. And so my ability to communicate with her was very nonverbal, highly intuitive. And my way of, I mean, that's why I can look at water sometimes and be like, oh, I understand things about myself. And I think we all have that capacity, but I love highlighting how important that is for me and how important that is in general. But the way bird language has affected me was very unexpected, because it's still, I mean, it's sound. But how has I haven't read What the Robin Knows, but like maybe you can explain a little what the robin does know, and like how has bird language impacted the way that or changed the way that you've interacted with your environment?
The robin knows everything. And I would say bird language is highly somatic in the sense that a lot is being conveyed. The very early stages of bird alarms are like tail flicks, scratching, pausing, right? Like that robin flicked its tail and paused, and then it whinnied as it flew away. All right. So there were multiple opportunities to be in relationship with it. But it's subtle, they're tiny. So yeah, bird language is this idea that the birds are not just making random sounds, right? They are constantly in communication about the world, because everything is trying to kill birds, and everything is trying to kill birds all of the time. There's very few moments throughout the day that something is not trying to kill birds. So you have cats, dogs, all of the weasels, short tail, long tail, fishers, squirrels. I've even seen a video of a deer eating a bird, a horse eating a bird. And then you have all of the other birds that are trying to kill birds, like sharp-shinned hawks and Steller's jays and crows. And they're not just trying to kill you, they're also trying to kill your babies, right? And so it's like if you lived in a cul-de-sac and you had like 4 of your neighbors were known serial killers, right? Think about the level of awareness you would probably cultivate and the interest in the people around you. And so birds are highly, highly aware out of necessity. And so they're always checking in with each other, right? A robin is a great example. It runs, stops, looks, feeds, stops, looks, runs, stops, like, and only when it has a perceived moment of safety does it feed. And then it's like right? Am I okay? So birds are the most aware creatures, and they can tell us a lot about ourselves and a lot about what's going on in the world. And a story that I have about how they reflect what's going on with you is they're basically looking at you and they're like safe or unsafe, right? It's a very binary line. Is this person safe? Are they unsafe? Right? Because you're walking through their kitchen, right? Like, how would you feel if like somebody just burst into your front door, like walked on your kitchen table and then walked out the back door? Like, you would be very adrenalated.
And forged their pantry as we walked through it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's happening. And so one day I remember I applied for this job that I really wanted and I didn't get the job, and that meant I was going to have to move and kind of like uproot my life. And I was just like sad and angry, and I, with very little awareness, I went to my sit spot and I was just like in my thoughts. And as I was walking to my sit spot, I was like kicking out robins, like flushing robins at like 50 or 100 feet, which was pretty unusual for me because I had watched these robins raise multiple clutches of babies and they knew me pretty well, and I could generally get like pretty close to them. So I'm walking to my sit spot, bah, 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 sit. I'm kind of like, and I walk out, bah, 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 bah. I'm like, what is going on? Like, I thought it was them, right? I'm like, oh. And then the next day I kind of like come to some kind of like peace, and I did like a morning movement and I cooked myself a lovely breakfast and I took a nice like stroll out to my sit spot. And as I was walking out there, this robin, same robins, like almost flew like right into my face. It literally got to like right here before it realized I was a thing and like turned away. Happened again. I sat at my sit spot, and when I left my sit spot, same thing. A robin like flew at me. In a way, it didn't fly at me. It flew at me in a way that I felt like I was invisible. Like I was so like dropped in that I was not even perceived as a human. And I've had a lot of, and I like when I spend a lot of time in the woods, I have that experience of belonging, of animals not responding. I woke up with a chickadee in my beard once. It was literally inside my beard. And I was like, oh, what are you doing?
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah. And then they were like, I was like still waking up and they were like flying back and forth, like grabbing like little bits of my beard.
Wow.
I had been in the woods for, almost 8 days at that point, and I was just like living in the ground and like living minimally, and they just recognized me as just part of the landscape. So I think birds are really reflective of our state of mind and our state of being. And for me, as somebody who goes back and forth between nature and city, the birds are a constant through line. So you could go anywhere in the world, really, even in the like vast deserts, there are still birds. And while we don't often get to see animals like mammals, especially unless they're running away from us, we typically on a daily basis, we all have the opportunity to see and interact with birds wherever we are. Pigeons and hawks in the city, all of the juncos and chickadees that are feeding about the landscape. So birds are the most easy access to nature connection. They are a bridge between worlds. And I think of like that as like flight, right? Like air is both like, connecting the ground and the sky. And the birds can always be a reminder that nature is everywhere.
Cool. I think focusing my attention on the birds just has me even more so appreciating like the soundtracks of places, like the sounds and the way that impacts me, makes me feel in a place. Yeah, I mean, just mentioning my voice and like being on this journey of making sound as a human, like joining that chorus in a way is like a really beautiful analogy for me, a metaphor, I suppose. About attention, something that I really, going back to relevance realization and being able to, how I find certain things relevant is a really interesting concept for me. And what I focus my attention on, how that relates to it is a part of that. And something that I liked that I think you asked John, maybe, the intersection of love and attention.
Mm-hmm.
And one marker of aliveness that I've really enjoyed and are like noticing and incorporating it into my life is to caring and tending, like actively reaching out and tending the things that I believe need to be tended, and like giving a shit. And choosing to focus my attention on things that I can actually change, has me feeling more fulfilled because I can actually do something about the things that I can do something about. What happens when we don't practice that? When maybe the attention, when we don't have focused attention, what is the intersection of love and attention?
Yeah, I don't know. But what happens when we don't have focused attention? I think in a different world, I think a lot more would be possible. But I think in our modern world, so many things are biting for our attention that if we don't have focused attention, it's very easy to get co-opted into things and ways of being that are not in service of the person you want to be. It's like, your phone is like pulling your attention all of the time, right? I was up in Canada a few weeks ago, and I was in a place where there was no service, and I just turned my phone off and like put it away, and it was so nice to see where my natural attention would go. And I think in a more like wild world, our attention would be brought to the salient landscape or like the events of a land, like your own natural curiosity. I think like that would be the ultimate, right? Like children who are left in an unstructured, timeless space, they naturally do all these things that are salient to them. But as adults, we have so many things that are like pulling our attention away that we actually do need to cultivate our own focus. Otherwise, I think we can very easily fall into habits and routines that are, again, like not really serving us. And meditation is a great example of that. It's like, cool, like you could spend like 10 minutes a day meditating, has profound impacts on all aspects of your life. Like the science is very well studied in that aspect. And a lot of people don't do it, but they very easily spend 10, if not way more hours on social media or engaging with their phone. So there are so many things we could engage with. and we did more naturally without a lot of these like modern conveniences. Like, oh, I could like read a book, which takes a little bit more focused attention, or I could watch Netflix, which takes zero focused attention. Right. I mean, you can still pay attention, but it's like these levels of like, it's like listening, right? You can kind of like listen to somebody, but like when you're in deep listening, it is just like meditation. I have to like, when I'm like deeply listening to somebody, I have to like, I'm like, okay, like, oh, what are they saying? You know, and even that is a practice of listening versus like getting ready to speak, right? And so I do think I think John was right in that attention and love are not the same thing, but I think we can bring them into a Venn diagram of the things we love, we can give more attention to, and we can make sure they're getting a higher percentage of our attention, right? And yeah, so we talk about decision fatigue, we talk about the ability to actually pay attention. Huberman talks about like we basically can really only do like 2 90-minute bouts of focused attention every day before our effectiveness starts to wane. And so again, we can start to use some of the modern scientific tools. And then now if there's something I love, like cool, and I know that I only have a couple bouts of focused attention today, I want to make sure that I direct that 90 minutes of focused attention to something that I love, to doing, like, I like what you said, like doing something about the things I can do something about. Right.
Yeah. Because
And so, yeah, that's where that's where I would see the intersection between love and attention.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks. I felt like part of the just constant inward that I had experienced was caring so much about things that I had no way of changing. And I like what John says too, like that love, I wrote this down, like love is a higher order mode and caring in a way for certain types of goals. Like, so focusing on attention on things and caring about specifically something with a goal in mind. And to me, like is that caring to the degree that I'm going to do something about it. I just really appreciate that reframe, which kind of leads into what each of us are actually doing in the world. And real estate is an interesting, it's a new field for me to be working in. And we connected recently on like what you're building in the world. And I'm curious if, I mean, because it seems like you love building and creating opportunities and places for people, creating space for people to have connection. So what is it that you're building, and what are some of the success stories that you've heard with the people that come to the spaces that you build?
Yeah. What am I building? I don't know yet, but I'm laying the foundation for something to emerge. Yeah, so recently I teamed up with a friend of mine and we built essentially a retreat center. We built a place for people to come to deepen their connection to the natural world. And we did this by lowering the bar to access. So, right, a lot of us, when we want to go out to nature, we think we need all of this gear, right? We're told that we need all of these things. And if we want to go camping and actually get the deeper benefits of spending time with nature, like easily you're gonna drop $1,000 on gear between shoes and, I mean, you obviously don't need that much, but we live in a world where we've compartmentalized everything. Like, I need my yoga pants, and then I need my workout pants, and then I need my jogging pants, and I got my jogging shoes and my house slippers and my dance shoe, right? So we have separated all of the possible things. So then we think when we go camping, well, we need camping gear, we need special pants and special vented shirts and all of these layers and gloves and hats and nets and headlamps and tents and sleeping bags, and just like the list grows in a way that can be very overwhelming and very prohibited for somebody living in the modern world to just want to get outside for the weekend, to go and experience a lot of the benefits that we know are there. And so we created a place where we took care of all of those things for you, so that you can simply show up with whatever clothes you're comfortable in. And we have beds and duvets and sheets and pillows and fire pits and cook stoves and water and lights, and really everything that you could need to be outside camping very comfortably, but not to the point where it's like extravagant and then it becomes cost prohibited. So we're trying to find that middle of the road ground, being aware of our impact that we're having on the place. We specifically selected and cut down trees, and we milled all of those trees to create platforms and tree houses and outbuildings and things like that. Instead of just buying wood from far away, we harvest all of our water on the land, and we also use only solar power to charge any of the resources that we're using, which I'm aware has impact on lands far, far away. But yeah, it's tough to walk in the world of modernity and live a good life and not have a negative impact. So yeah, we're doing the best we can to hopefully, by connecting more people with nature, we're at least slowly turning the tide, and people will recognize and want to preserve spaces, because so many beautiful places. I know of two places, two like 4,000 or more acre wildernesses that are going to be completely clear cut, and large housing communities will replace them. And so our hope is to preserve land, create low impact housing and opportunities for people to be outside that is not just completely destructive and extractive of a place.
I resonate with that. I mean, I feel like a lot of why I got into real estate was because of my ideals about the way we were living on land. Yeah, and how to, something Warren Brush told me a while in a permaculture class with him was like that, because I asked like why we feel like we have to rebuild home, and or like where we belong, because this is the question of like, well, if my ancestors colonized here, do I even have a home on this land? And something that he said stuck with me, that we are a people in flight. And I just resent that like we're just on the move to find that place. And I'm like, I don't always want to be a people in flight. I mean, I get that, like you said earlier, we can preserve energy by building a home that's in one place, and like by storing up food, we don't have to go forage it every time. And there's got to be a middle ground, and to like living with and not yeah, extracting for an ideal of what a home would be, which right now seems to be, oh, we got to cut down trees and build houses, and they all got to look the same. And yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah, like, are
Um,
you familiar with the work of Daniel Schmachtenberger and Nate Hagen?
no.
Okay, I'll send you their work. Is
Yeah.
it's both like really sad and defeating. They do eventually get to the light side of it. Um, but yeah, basically like we live in a world without limits, and we are told that the sky is the limit and anything is possible. And that's actually like the deeper root of our problem, is there actually are limits to things. And like living in debt, right? Like living outside of your means. Like anybody who's like successful will both tell you that, like, don't live outside of your means, right? Like you don't want to be in debt. And yet one of the best ways to make money is to like be in debt, right? And when we accumulate this massive debt in like the negative way, it feels like this like heavy burden versus a resource. And but it's all not real. And so we are living in a time where we have amassed a deep resource debt of nature. And really the only way to live in harmony is like to set a limit. Is to be like, yeah, like we actually can only use this much. And we know this when there's like water restrictions, like you can only use this much water. We actually need to impose those things on like a global level, like way more often. Like you can only use this much electricity, you can only use this much water, like you can only use this much gas. And that is so against the like freedom of the American dream of limitations. um, but basically their work is highlighting that when you find out the limit is like, right, it's just like when the power goes out, people realize how vulnerable they are and how not prepared they are. So yeah, we're definitely moving towards that time, so that I believe limiting ourselves and living in modesty is ultimately one of the ways that we can actually live in integrity. It's not that we can't have things, because we do need to participate in order to affect change, right? Like if you and I, if we just go off and fuck off in the woods, then we are not going to be able to like affect more people, and that was also the sentiment of like John and Tom, who had the skills to live in the woods in perpetuity. And because they chose not to, they chose to participate, in both worlds. They have a huge, tree of effect underneath them. And, again, not from a place of ego, but people tell me like, Kyle, you've had a positive impact on my life, and I connect with nature and I think a little bit more before I do things. And that feels really good in that. Yeah. So it's like, I think living in modesty, living within limits, and living in connection with nature highlights and keeps those feedback loops a little more tightly coupled.
Yeah, I love that. And I don't know what the answer is. I feel like I just am biting off the bigger than I can chew, because like it matters, yeah, we're past the limit. We are in debt. And yeah. Yeah. And I want to live in both worlds. And I yeah, want to share that. I had something else I was going to say, but do you have more time for some home and humanity questions?
Yes, I do.
How has living in a place you love help helps shape the philosophy you live by. Because something you said a long time ago was being at home is where you are. And that's really tough. And yeah, that's kind of what we were just talking about. Like, I don't want to be a people in flight, but I don't want to be fixed to a place, and I want to belong somewhere, but clearly it's not anywhere. And you know, loving where you are though seems to be key in all of that. So that shaped him.
Yeah, I think ultimately recognizing that you are a human on this earth, and because of that, you belong to this earth. Right? You were not born into the world, you were born from the world. You are made up literally of earth and water and cosmic dust, provably. And in that sense, that helps me realize that I belong. And through the lens of tracking, realizing that I am impacting all of the places that I go, that wherever I am, I'm having an impact. And to live like I belong makes me want to have a better impact, and to just have that sense, like wherever I am, and to see my tracks and to connect with the birds and the plants of those places, it always just reminds me that like I belong here. I am a participant wherever I go. And if I act, yeah, and that maybe that's this is kind of a insight in the moment, maybe, so I'm not sure where I'm going to go with this, but when I think about colonization, and I think about all of the Europeans that came to this landscape, and they brought all of these foods and all of these things, and the story goes that they didn't really see the value of this place, and they kept like bringing the things from their home. One of the really detrimental stories is actually earthworms are incredibly invasive, and they are not native, and actually not just not native, the glacier pushed them so far south that the entire ecology evolved without earthworms. And we think of them as really beneficial, which they are in a garden setting, but not at all in the forest. And so they're like, this soil must be shit because there's no earthworms here. So they're like not understanding of the impact that they're having, and they like feel like they don't belong. So they brought all of these things in to try to create a sense of belonging, which ultimately has this like really detrimental impact. So when I go to a new place, I just try to pay attention and understand kind of the deeper principles of impact and awareness. And like permaculture is like, don't do anything for a year, like just sit on the land and pay attention, because once you cut that tree down, you can't put it back. Once you dig that trench, like it's forever changed. So yeah, I think living, yeah, I think there's a couple things in what you said. So I remember living in Seattle and not wanting to put the work in to build a garden because I was renting. And I'm like, why would I put a garden in here? I don't know how long I'm going to be here. If I put a garden here, I don't own it. Like, yada, yada, yada. And then I was like, fuck it. Like, I'm going to put a garden here. And if I leave next week, like I left a garden, I amended the soil, I provided habitat. At least what I felt like was a positive impact. And so whenever I go to a space, I either try to be like the silent observer and take in, and to minimize and be aware of my impact and to participate in subtle ways, or I try to fully participate in what I believe is the most beneficial way. So yeah, I don't know. I kind of diverged from the question, but that's what came up for me.
Thank you. That's it. That's perfect. It makes me think of I was just renting a room that I moved out of lived there for about a year, and I planted asparagus while I was there because I was like, I'm not going to see this asparagus, but other people will, and that's important. How this question is, how have you found home wherever you are? But you might have just answered that. But the next question is kind of related. Like, why do you think so many people don't feel at home on Earth?
Yeah, I've actually had a lot of really good dialogues around this. So I have a working hypothesis
Great.
of why we don't feel like we belong. And so the analogy metaphor thing that I've been using is like, okay, let's say you want to get into rock climbing and you don't really, you heard it's good, it's fun. So you show up to the rock climbing gym, and for whatever reason, you very much feel like you don't belong. You're like, you don't know the language, you don't know the dress, you don't have the equipment, you don't really know what like a V5 even means. And so there's this, you very much, it's hard to know when you belong, but you definitely know when you don't belong, right? I think that's like pretty common.
Yeah.
And so over time, you learn the language, you learn what a jug is, you learn what a crimper is, you know what all the V scales mean, you get the right shoes, you get the right shorts, you get a chalk bag, right? You start to feel more like you belong. And then when a new person comes, you can very easily recognize that they don't belong, right? And so if you think about this, like historically, like have always been a people of place, like our language, our accent, right? If you have a British accent and you come to America, people will be like, hey, you have an accent. But if you're in Britain, they don't think you have an accent, right? It's like the way your accent, your dialogue, your language is very much of a place, okay? Your clothing also is very much of a place. You know this at WASP, like over the time, everybody has wool, everybody has earth tones, right? Camo, all of this stuff that is reflective of place, like here in Seattle and on the peninsula, everybody has rain boots and rain jackets and rain pants and da-da-da. And if you are just like walking around in shorts and a t-shirt, it's going to be obvious that you don't belong here. You are unaware of the dress. And then historically, right, like color would also, the color of your clothing, the natural colors that are available would have been representative of place. And then you would have been drinking water from a local stream or spring that's of that place. And then you would have only been eating foods that are regionally and seasonally available, right? So the things that make you are all of a place. And now we live in a world where that is not true at all, right? We eat avocados from Guatemala. We eat shrimp from Indonesia. We eat Atlantic salmon. We eat bananas from Brazil. We eat all of these foods that are, first of all, not native to where we live. And then we eat them outside of the season in which they're even available. And then 0 of those foods are grown within 100 miles of where we're living, right? So we're eating all of this food. So we are actually made up of all of those places, right? Like it's really interesting. Like if you were to go and like get your hormones tested and they would look at the reference ranges, like reference ranges for inland cultures are different than cultures by the sea. And if you're in Europe, because they have like more boron in the soil, let's say, they have literally different reference ranges because they have different nutrients available in those soils. So it's like you are made up of all these places, and then you're drinking water from who knows where. A lot of people will drink like only bottled water from springs, far, far away. And then you could have an accent and a language that is not representative of your place. So you are a conglomeration of all of these places that are not where you are in the world, right? And that's like revolutionarily, something like that. And it's very sad. Also, so I had a positive version of that experience where I was living and building the retreat center. I was living outside all summer. I was drinking only the water from that spring, and my girlfriend, she was like, you smell like, your smell is amazing. Like, I love your smell. And then one day I smelled my smell in the landscape and I was like, whoa, I smell like this place. And then as I moved into a more fractured, domesticated life, my smell has changed. She's like, you smell different. And I'm like, no. So why don't we feel like we belong to a place? Because we are not made of that place in any real tangible way. And then we're not even aware of the plants and animals that we can be connected to.
Wow, you've inspired me to smell like a place now. First. Now I'm just thinking of, well, now I'm thinking of like my dad's relationship with the sheep, because I was just thinking we both have to go feed sheep after this, so I only have one more question, and then we will go feed the sheep. But like just in the connection with my connection to the beings of a place, because something you said at one point was like the things that children naturally do in a place, like if they follow their own curiosities, have to do with the systems of that place. And so the natural curiosities that we have as people are often in relation to the place that we're at. And then my seeing, like going back to the birds, like my seeing the way the birds blend so perfectly with the leaves of that place, because they are birds of that place, and the colors of that place, and the camouflage that all beings can blend in together. And yeah, to become one with a place in that way is yeah, maybe there are no words for it, and maybe that's the point. Last question. What gives you faith in humanity and hope in a better future?
I think whenever I find people like yourself that deeply care and are doing work that seems, when I find people that care and are willing to take risk and to do things that are unconventional and are willing to, like, I see you as like a mole, right? You're kind of like, I'm in the real estate world, but I'm like changing what that looks like. Like I just heard a story of a guy who actually, like, he intentionally got a job at Waste Management so that he could seed the building of a transfer station that did like commercial composting. That was a food hub for agricultural local farmers, and that did like all of these kind of like weird unconventional things. So yeah, and where I'm currently at my friend's farm, I see him as a model of converting this landscape. He's doing things that are very unconventional. He's growing a shitload of nut trees and fruit trees out on a sheep pasture. And when people are like, "You're taking up all of this pasture space," he's like, not really. And I'm creating like resource for myself. I'm creating food for the sheep and other animals, creating shade and slowing, sinking, spreading water. And so we kind of have these like modernistic viewpoints of like what and how things should work. And I'm lucky to be seated in communities and around people who are aware that there's a different way of doing things and want to engage and fund those projects and give life to a different way. And I have no idea that what we're doing or trying to do is the right way or a better way. I just know that what we're doing is not working, and I'm willing to put myself out there and do something different that at least makes me feel like I'm doing the right thing.
Totally. Yeah, thank you. I mean, I wonder that it holds me back a lot, is that wonder, like, is this more of my trying to, save the world through more toxic traits that are shadows to me right now? Like, it's like, that's not that's the block from like creating good change in the world. And I think that intention and attention on what I can change and, and seeking to learn more, because yeah, what's clear to me is that it's not working. Something I'm passionate about in real estate that I want to do for everybody, even if, they don't have a property or home they want to sell or buy, is like help them with the landscape they already have, and being permaculture eyes for people that don't have those permaculture eyes. And since I haven't had a lot of formal permaculture training, it's like, a lot of people that do. So can you connect me to like permaculture advisors and specialists that can like help in the Western Washington area? Or at least teach.
I can definitely.
Sorry.
What's that?
I was just saying, because I can't go to the permaculture design course next year that Warren Brush is putting on like I thought I was going to be able to. So
there is a thing that does happen out here sometimes. You can at least look it up. It's called the permaculture convergence.
Yeah, heard of that.
I've gone to that a few times, and that was really profound. But yeah, I will. Yeah, I personally don't know a lot of these like people, but I'm just a thread away from all of those people. Like my friend who owns this farm, Niall, he's deeply connected in the permaculture and earthworks community. And yeah, it would be a great resource. He's highly connected in a lot of these movements that are happening. So yeah, I can definitely start that conversation.
Cool, thanks. Because I have real estate people that are like, what are you doing here? And then like wilderness people who are like, you're in real estate? Like what? And there's a way, the more connections, the more smashing of the worlds, I think. More healing will happen.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm working with like commercial real estate investors right now. It's just like I'm just like the weird nature guy, and there's like, yeah, wealthy people that are like really fascinated about the work that we're doing and want to support it.
Yeah, totally. Yep, otherworldly. Oh, there's so much more to talk about, and we will in the future. Thank you so much for your time today, Kyle. This was really enriching, and I can't wait to talk to you again sometime.
Yeah, thank you for your questions, your well thought out questions that, yeah, definitely a lot of things I have not thought about, and I really appreciate questions because sometimes it's hard. It forces me to articulate things that might be hidden deep inside and allows me to have my own realizations and insights, and yeah, hopefully seeds future conversation and insight, and just kind of like moving and growing the story through conversation is something that I really appreciate right now. And yeah, it's also bringing me to the present moment and reminding me of really salient moments in my life in the darkest of times as we approach the winter solstice. So I appreciate your illuminatingness.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The art of questioning, that's something I care about a lot, and goes back to the art of mentoring and how illuminating, how questions can illuminate the darkness and the beauty in that. So into the darkness we go. Thank you, Kyle.
Whoo!